Hello friends, in this video I will share in detail with you the P&G interview format. What I will cover in this video is the P&G interview process, like how many interviews are there in total, the timing of the interview, how long does it take to give an interview. Third is the content of the interview, what is covered and what will be talked or discussed in the interview. And lastly, some special tips that you should be mindful of as you go on delivering the interview. So make sure you stay tuned till the end because I will be sharing some special tips towards the end, and also will throw in a tip in between as well, so you don't miss out watching the complete video. That is the intent here. So make sure you stay tuned, make sure you keep your ears to the video and listen to every word of it, as this is very, very, very important for you to really hit the ball out of the park when it comes to your P&G interview. Now, starting with the process. The process will start typically speaking, with the screening interview. Screening interview is an interview that HR will conduct. Now, the screening interview is typically there because P&G receives a large number of candidates. Now, part of them are filtered out through the P&G peak performance test and the online test, but there will still be a large pool of candidates who would have cleared the test and who have strong resumes. But P&G cannot just interview everyone or take everyone through the interviewing process. So what the HR will do, let's assume there are 20 candidates who are shortlisted in terms of who have cleared the online test, the peak performance test, and have strong resumes. Now they won't take the entire 20 candidates through the interviewing process, so they will shortlist the interviews or shortlist the candidates into a number that is manageable. So let's say they have 20 candidates, they will shortlist it to somewhere around 5 candidates that they can take through their remaining interview process. So here what HR will do is they will have quick 30-minute interviews with all the candidates. It is kind of speed dating for them to evaluate which candidates they shortlist and move to the hiring process or through the hiring process. So here in those 30 minutes, since the time is limited, they won't go through all 5 peak performance factors. By the way, if you're not aware of the peak performance factors, I'll highly recommend you check out my video, for which I will leave the link here, where I explain what those peak performance factors are, because it is very critical for you to know what they are before you even attempt on training or preparing yourself for the interview process. Now, instead of going through the 5 peak performance factors, they will pick the top 2 most important peak performance factor and only ask you questions on that. If you clear those questions, then they will move you to the shortlisted round, and if not, they will just move you out or shortlist you out. Now, in case you like this video, I have to ask for you. One is press the like button, as this keeps me motivated. Second, press the subscribe button along with the bell icon so you get notified as soon as I put a new content on this channel. On this channel, I post content pertaining to career and financial success for early and mid-career professionals. More importantly, in case you want me to continue making unbiased content like this, you can support me on patreon.com. I will leave the link to my Patreon page in the description of this video. Now let's get rolling back into the video. Now, once you've aced that screening interview and you were able to give a quality answer for those top 2 peak performance factors that the screening interviewer was looking for or was evaluating you on, then you get shortlisted and you move through the balance of the hiring process. Now, how the balance of the hiring process works is typically there will be 3 interviews. These interviews will be taken by random individuals in the company. They may have nothing to do with your department. They may have nothing to do with your function. For instance, if I am appearing for a finance role, I may be interviewed by a marketing professional in the company or a sales professional or an engineer at the plant. So it could be anyone. It could be an HR individual as well, or could be my hiring manager, or it could be someone from finance as well. So it is all random selection. They select 3 interviewers from the organization who are actually trained interviewers, because P&G makes sure that they give training to the interviewers or to the individuals first before they become trained interviewer. By the way, this is a very grilling process. One, you go through a full 1 to 2 day training process. Second, you have to shadow some expert who already is an expert at interviewing. You just sit with them and observe them. Third, that individual, that expert, starts to observe you. Only after that you are qualified as an interviewer who can go and conduct interviews in future. So as I said, you will go through 3 interviews which will be conducted by random interviewers from Procter & Gamble. These 3 interviewers may not even know who they are interviewing, or may not even know if they are interviewing the same person. They would just interview you. They would have a score sheet in front of them. They would take score based on your answers and evaluate you against each of the peak performance factors, and would grade you in terms of a score from 1 to 5, or could be 1 to 10, or could be some grading like good, bad, or best, or excellent. So they will rate you individually. And once you've gone through all 3 interviews, by the way, this is another important piece. It is not that you go through the first interview and if you don't get shortlisted, you are removed from the interview process. That won't happen, because even if the individual doesn't like you with whom you give your first interview, you still have 2 other chances, because that individual will not submit his or her case till you've gone through the 3 interviews. Only then these 3 interviewers who have conducted your 3 interviews, they will sit together and they will have a debrief on you, where they will discuss whether they qualify you as someone who has cleared all interviews or has aced all peak performance answers or not. So if all 3 unanimously agree that you've done well in the interview, then they give you score and rank you in terms of who did the best. In that case, if you're the one who did the best and who scored the highest amongst all 3, then you get hired. If you don't score the highest among all 3, but you were still good at answering the questions and you still qualified as someone good but not the best, then you receive an email which says, "Thank you for applying. We like your initiative and we appreciate that you applied. However, we selected someone else." But this doesn't mean that you've not cleared the interview. You were a good candidate. However, we just hired someone else, which means you can go and apply for other roles which are available at Procter & Gamble, and you won't have to reappear for the test again. Or even for that matter, there could be an instance where they may just call you randomly out of the blue and say, "Since you were the second best candidate, we have a new role open, kind of a similar role. Are you interested?" And they may even hire you. That could also be a possibility. So essentially, you've not failed the interview, you've not failed any of the peak performance test, and in the next 12 months, you can use those results to apply for any other position. Now, when you apply for a new position, probably you'll have to go through the interviewing process again, but you don't have to go through the testing process. And in those interviews, you can always mention and talk that you did clear the interviews. It's just that you were not the best candidate, there was someone else, and hence you are still in the race. Third is that they don't agree on you, and some of them or part of the interviews amongst those 3 say you were really good, and then there are some who say no, you were not good at all. Then it is the onus or the responsibility is on the person who said that you were good to convince the person who said that you're not good that you were actually good. So this is where it becomes very important that if you are not able to perform well in the first interview, you still have a chance, because if you can really impress the second and the third interviewer, then my friend, you have a very strong chance to still be in the race and still get hired. Because if those 2 individuals, and especially if those 2 individuals are senior in the company and have higher seniority, they can certainly convince the other individuals or other interviewers to hire you, because your interview with them was just amazing. It's just that you may have had a bad day with the first interviewer. However, the other 2 interviews really went well, and those 2 interviewers really like you, and hence they will be convincing the third interviewer that you are a really good candidate, and through arguments they may be able to convince them, and eventually you may become the candidate who gets hired or who gets the highest score or better score. So that is another thing that happened. But net, what I'm trying to tell you here is you will go through the 3 interview process, irrespective of whether you do well or you do bad in the first interview or the second interview or even the third interview. Those 3 interviewers don't talk to each other, don't make a decision till they've sat together and debrief on you, which means till you've gone through all 3 interviews, there won't be any decision on you. Now, in a very rare instance, there is a decision which is made at any point in time during this process. That is if you violate or if you say something which is in violation of the P&G's purpose, values and principles, which is essentially, or in nutshell, to say if there is something wrong with your ethics. For instance, you give an example where you talk about ethics being compromised and you were okay with it, that is the piece where P&G will not move you through the process and will make a decision that you are not going forward. So make sure you don't say something which shows a compromise in your ethics. Never do that. Again, I explained this in very detail in other videos that I've made on P&G hiring process and interviews. So make sure you go through the entire playlist and get yourself familiar with PVPs. It is very important. Now, one call out, I do offer one-to-one coaching and mock interview sessions for my followers. So in case you are interested in having a one-to-one mock or a one-to-one Q&A session with me live, you can book that session with me using the link that I will share in the description of this video. Now, in case you're curious as to what those coaching and mentoring or mock interview sessions would look like, I have some recorded mock coaching or mentoring sessions that I've had with my followers in past. You can check them out. I will leave the link to those videos in the description of this video. This will kind of give you an idea as to what kind of coaching sessions I've had in past with my followers. In case you want to have a completely different session, I'm open to that. You can leave it in the notes as you're booking the session with me using the link in the description of this video. Now let's get rolling back into the video. Second piece that I wanted to talk about is timing. So essentially the three interviews or each of the three interviews would be 1 hour long. First 5 minutes is you kind of introducing yourself. So be prepared for introducing yourself. I have a separate video on where I talk about how you should go about introducing yourself. Make sure you check out that video. It is very important that you ace this part of the interview because this is the first part of the interview. This is where you set the tone for the interview. Then there would be around 50 minutes or 45 minutes, let's say, of questions that the interviewer would be asking you. And towards the end, the interviewer will leave around 5 minutes with regards to reverse interview questions where they turn the table and let you ask questions of them. For that part as well, I made a separate video where I explain what kind of questions you should be asking the interviewer. These two parts, especially the introduction and the reverse interview questions, is typically not graded because the interviewer is not evaluating you. It's just to warm up the environment, just to get you started and just to end you up with a formality of saying if you have any questions for them. However, if you really do a good job here, like you really come prepared and ace it, you will really surprise them because they were not expecting anything out of the usual or out of the blue, and suddenly you are so prepared. You ask them the best questions, the right question, and just impress them. Or you introduce yourself in such a beautiful and smart and elegant way that just impresses them. Now, in between these 45 to 50 minutes, expect somewhere around 8 questions to be asked, which would mean you will have like 6 minutes per question. And 6 minutes per question would be, let's say, 1 minute for the interviewer to ask the question, let's say 30 seconds or 1 minute. And then you have around 5 minutes to 5 minutes, 30 seconds for you to answer the question on average. Now, there could be certain answers that you are sharing or certain examples you're talking about which can take longer than 5 minutes. It's just that they're such good examples. They cover so many things. They touch upon so many peak performance factors that you just can't help it but talk longer for those examples. Indeed, go ahead and spend more time talking about those examples, but make sure they should be your best examples, like your highest achievements. If so, you can talk about them more than the average, because certainly there will be questions for which you will not have a lot to talk about, and they're like very small, short examples, which may not take the entire 5 minutes and can take like 3 or 4 minutes. So typically expect the interviewer to ask you somewhere around 5 to 8 questions. Frankly speaking, they would be going for 5 questions because there are 5 peak performance factors. But usually there are times where they would want to probe more in a particular peak performance factor and would like to ask an additional question from that particular peak performance factor. And usually, this is one of the tips as well, this is around the leadership question. Why? Because leadership question is leadership peak performance factor is one of the most important peak performance factor. If you ace the leadership questions or the leadership peak performance factor and don't really ace the rest, you still have a strong chance to get through the interview and get hired. But if you screw up on the leadership and rest all peak performance factors are like you ace them, no, my friend, you won't have a chance and you will not be able to make through into P&G. So remember, leadership question is very important. And here, this is what I'm referring to is that the interviewer might want to ask you at least 2 questions around the leadership peak performance factor. So make sure you prepare yourself for the leadership question to the nth limit. Now here, let me get into the content of the interview. In the content of the interview will have 2 portions. One is behavioral interview questions and second is situational interview questions. Now, behavioral interview questions will take around, let's say, 30 minutes of your interview, and the balance 10 to 15 minutes would be for situational interview questions. So most part of the interview will be taken or consumed by behavioral interview questions, where you will have behavioral interview questions around those 5 peak performance factors. I made a separate video where I explain what are behavioral interview questions and how you should go about acing them. Essentially, they're about it, that the interviewer is kind of inquiring into your past experience and trying to evaluate if in your past experience you've behaved in ways which they expect you to behave in P&G as well. And that's why it's called behavioral interview question. So you will have to go in your past and talk about an experience that you've had and what was the context, how did you handle it, and what were the results. So the questions would typically sound like, tell me about a time when you were able to lead a project which was failing. How did you go about leading it? So this is kind of a question where you have to go and look into your past and see where in your past you performed or led a project where it was failing and you kind of helped it and moved it to success. As I said, I explained this in detail as to how you should go about understanding, addressing, and acing behavioral interview questions. Now, behavioral interview questions will typically have 5 questions. Let's say 1 question for each of the peak performance factor. And the situational questions will have 2 questions, 2 different kind of situations. Situations are usually either business related, what if there is a business situation and how would you go about handling it, or about an organizational situation like you are short on time or you have limited resources or there is a deadline that you have to meet or the deadline has been pulled forward. How will you go about managing it? Now, with behavioral interview questions, there is a scenario that you've had in past and you kind of share the same experience that you've had in past and kind of tell them or assure the interviewer that if similar situation happens in the future, you have done it in past, you have the knowledge and you can replicate it. Now, situation question is all about the interviewer giving you a situation and asking you how you will handle it if it happens to you in the future. So it's not in the past, it's in the future. Now, with behavioral interview questions, there will be context, action, and result because it happened in the past. So what was the context? Action, what actions did you take and what were the results? But for situational interview questions, the interviewer is giving you the context. They're already telling you you're in this situation. How will you handle it? So all you need to do is talk about the actions primarily and maybe just talk about the results towards the end just as a summary, but they're looking for the actions because they've given you the context already. Now, the reason the situational interview questions exist, or the primary reason, is because P&G usually hires people who are fresh graduates or don't have a lot of experience in their past. So for them to really ace the behavioral interview question is kind of difficult because it is very difficult for them to go into their past and talk about the time when they performed in a particular situation or did a particular project. However, it is very easy for people to talk about a situation that may happen in future. So if a certain situation happens, how would they go about solving it? So that is why the situational interview questions exist, which is giving you an advantage where you don't have a lot of experience to talk from your past, and hence you can talk in terms of how you will handle it if that particular situation happens. Now, situational interview questions on which I've made multiple videos, so I highly encourage you check them out because I explain what are the questions you should be expecting and how you should be going about answering them. But typically speaking, there are 3 types of questions you should expect. One is around business. So what if a certain business situation will happen, like you run out of product or there is fire in the factory or the sales are tanking, some business scenario, how would you handle it? Second would be something around people. So there's a conflict, there's an issue, you go in a fight, you go in a disagreement, how would you handle it? And third is around organizing. So you have a deadline is pulled forward or you have change in priorities, how would you go about handling it? Again, I highly recommend and urge you to check out the videos I've made on this subject for you to be able to ace situational interview questions for Procter & Gamble. Now, another important thing to know, or an insider hack to know, is that P&G provides its interviewers an interviewing guide, which is a booklet where they have, or it's kind of a one-page document or two-page document where they have all the peak performance factors listed and a score in front of them. So you have to fill those score. And under each of the peak performance factors, there are recommended questions, like 2-3 questions that you should ask the interviewee. Now, most of the interviewers are lazy. So what they do is they don't come up with their own questions. They will just go in the interview, they'll look at the sheet and they'll exactly ask the questions which are written in that sheet. And they will just ask those questions. So what you will find is at times, all 3 interviewers will be asking the same question because they are lazy. They just read the first question under each of the peak performance factor and they just ask that question. So knowing that question is very easy. And I've made a video on this where I take you through all the questions exactly in the same sequence as they're written in the booklet. So if you pay attention to the first question, and this is the tip that I want to impart to you, is make sure the first question under each of the peak performance factor is one that you've kind of memorized, you know it by heart, because that question, there is 90% chance they would be asking that question. I will leave the link to my video where I talk about that cheat sheet, that booklet, or those interview questions exactly in the same order as they are in that booklet. So check out that video here. Another important piece here is leadership part. The leadership peak performance factor is the most important one, which is if you ace the leadership peak performance factor, but the other peak performance factors, you don't just ace them, like you are 3 out of 5, and in the leadership you're 5 out of 5, you still have a chance to get hired. But if your leadership peak performance answer is like 3 out of 5 and the rest are 5 out of 5, there is a good chance you may not get hired because leadership peak performance factor is the most important one. Hence, make sure that you prepare your leadership question to the max limit. And one more important thing is that you should expect to be asked the leadership question first in the interview. So soon after you introduce yourself, which as I said is one of the most important part of the interview because you set the tone of the interview, the second most important part is the leadership question. So make sure you are highly prepared for the leadership question, not just because it is the most important part, but also because it is the first question that will be asked. So you will be setting again the tone of the interview with that question because that would be the first question. They ask you that question and you just throw it out of the park. You ace it. And then, my friend, you are just rocking the interview because you aced the best or the most important part of the interview or the most important peak performance factor. And it was the question that was first asked. So you'll be just doing well if you are able to ace it. Now here comes the last part where I share with you few tips that you need to consider when going around or going about your interview. One is take your time. If there is an interview question that comes your way and you want to think it through, you don't know the answer and you want to take your time, just take your time. Now that doesn't mean that you just stay silent for another 2-3 minutes. I would say take a minute, just stay silent, think about it and then answer. There is no pressure. There are no scores for answering immediately. Like if someone answers you a question and you just go immediately answering them, you won't get extra points. You rather take your time, you rather think about it, think it slow, and then answer or give the best answer versus trying to give the fastest possible answer, which is not the best answer. Second is if you are not able to answer a particular question, or maybe you just don't understand that question, ask them to ask you that question differently. So you go like, can you ask me this question differently? Is there another way for you to ask this question? And let them rephrase it. For instance, they ask you a question, tell me about a time when you led a team out of a difficult situation. And maybe you never did that. You never had that situation. Maybe you can say, can you ask me that question differently? And they go like, oh, okay, tell me about a time when you led a difficult project. Now it is easy, right? So you're not leading a team, you're leading a project. You didn't have experience leading a team, but you have experience leading the project. And suddenly you can say, oh yeah, I did this project where. So the idea is it's a leadership question. Whether you're leading a team, whether you're leading a project, it doesn't matter. However, it becomes very easy for you to relate to a particular situation which has really exactly happened with you in past. So if they ask you a question which you think, I don't know if really happened this way in my past, then you go about asking them, please, can you rephrase the question or can you ask it differently? By the way, saying, can you ask the question differently is much, much, much better, because as I said, they have this booklet in front of them. If they are not able to use the first question, they will just move to the second question or the third question or the fourth question. So they have like 4 or 5 questions with them. Just allow them to pick a different question which you think is easier for you to handle or answer. Second, what you can always say and always do is say, let me come back to you on that question towards the end of the interview. So you move to the next question, you handle the questions that you have answered for, and then keep that question towards the end and only address it towards the end of the interview. Can I answer that question later? Or can I get back to you on that question later in the interview? Just say that. They would be perfectly fine. Handle the questions that you think you have a better answer for, address them, and then get back to the question which you left initially and then answer it. Now here it is very important that you don't miss on it, like you don't forget about it. Make sure before the interview ends, even if the interviewer has forgotten about it, you bring it back and say, I did not answer that particular question. Is that something which is still relevant and you want to inquire? Let them ask you that question and then try to answer it. And as I said, if you can't answer it, ask them to rephrase it or ask it differently. And maybe that way you will be able to address it and then be able to do a better job at it. Lastly, one tip I give to the candidates that I coach is every time you're done answering the question, ask the interviewer if this is what they were looking for or if you were able to answer their question. So you go like saying, did I answer your question? This serves 2 purposes. One, it makes sure that you exactly answered the question that the interviewer was looking for and you just didn't go in a very different tangent. And now interviewer is like, oh gosh, this guy just wasted my time. You know what, I'll just move on to the next question and not repeat it or not explain myself further. And certainly when you ask that question, they go like, oh yeah, actually we were asking, or I was asking a different question. You went on a different tangent. This is what I was asking. So you kind of save yourself from getting 0 score for that question because you kind of asked them if you answered their question. And second is also whether you answered it in a good way or not. So you kind of go like, did I answer your question, which is, was it the good answer? Was it the right answer? And through their nod or through their smile or through their approval, you will be able to judge or gauge if you really did a good job or not. And if you think you didn't do a good job because they go like, yeah, kind of, that means they were looking for something extra. And then you can probe, tell me what you were looking for and I can help or elaborate more. Or maybe if this is not the best example, or if you didn't find this to be the best example, I can find another example from my past to answer this particular question. It's just a way for you to make sure that you really give an answer that the interviewer is looking for and it's a good answer. Because the interviewers are usually lazy. They won't go around explaining themselves. If you give in an answer, they go like, okay, fine, this is the answer. Let's just move on and I'll just fail this person and won't even bother. But once you ask this question, whether I was able to address your question or not, certainly there's pressure on them to say whether you did it or not. If not, it's your cue to say, how can I give a better answer? If you did, then it's a sign for you to just move on, be more confident about what you said before, and use that confidence to answer the future questions or the questions that will come in or proceed in that interview. Now, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully this video was helpful for you to now have awareness with regards to how the interview will be structured, what to expect in the interview, and also some smart tips on how you can ace them. Thank you. Now, in case you find this video helpful, I'm sure you'll find another video on my channel very helpful, where I talk about how you can go about answering a question around conflict management. Here's the video for that. Other than that, there is another video that I've made where I explain in detail that how you can go about answering a question with regards to how did you handle a failure or time that you fail. Check that video out here. Thank you.